JJ French is an American guitarist, manager, record producer, and founding member of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister. He's a columnist, author, and motivational speaker who oversees licensing and intellectual property rights for the Twisted Sister brand. His new book, Twisted Business, is part memoir and part business book. It follows French's adventure-filled life from growing up in New York City in the 60s to working as a drug dealer and struggling as an addict before quitting cold turkey, and finally to creating and cultivating Twisted Sister and turning it into one of the most successful bands in the world. Welcome to the program, JJ French.
Thank you for having me.
JJ, I always like to say that this show is about kind of uncorking the stories behind the stories. And I'm curious, where does your story begin? Where does the story of JJ French begin?
Well, I mean, I was born in 1952, which is an important year because that was the baby boomer, the heart of the baby boomer years. And I was a baby boomer baby, which means I was 14 when Sgt. Pepper came out, and I was, till the age of 20, lived the epicenter of the Beatles effect in the music business, which is between the ages of 12. I always say the music you listen to between the ages of 12 and 20 is the music that sticks with you for the rest of your life. It just so happens the Beatles fit into my 12 and 20 paradigm, so that's perfect. And then on top of that, the hippie thing was all encompassing. And so to live in New York City at that period of time with everything that was associated with it, which was the sex, drugs, rock and roll, politics was really big. Everybody, everyone in those days agreed that the war sucked and everybody hated the president. I mean, it was like universal. There was no splitting up of anything. It was just, you had 400,000 people in Woodstock. They all hated the same thing and they loved the same thing. And it's a different time. So it was a great time to be a teenager. It was a great time to be exposed to all the rock music I was exposed to, because it was the absolute epicenter of what is considered the height of the history of rock. So, having the ability to go see these bands every weekend for $1, $2, $3, and just feed yourself with it, if that's your addiction, is rock is your addiction. I mean, Bill Graham, who was the promoter who owned the Fillmore, I met him many years later, and I said, thank you for giving me my college degree, because living at the Fillmore was able to fuel my rock and roll dreams. Then there's politics involved, and there's anti-war, and there's pro-civil rights, and my parents are very politically connected. My mother was. And so I got dragged into that whole thing. So I lived it to the fullest. And then I got in the drug scene, same thing, lived that to the fullest, and was dealing and wound up going to Europe and becoming a house dealer at the Paradiso in 1971 in the Milky Way in Amsterdam. That was the drug culture capital of the world at that time. So that was being at the right place at the right time, kind of like a Zelig kind of life. That's kind of been my view of how I perceive things, being at the right place at the right time, seeing crazy things and living and being able to talk about it. I almost felt like going back in my life, I always felt that I was a reporter, like John Segal was put here to let you know what it was like, and he witnessed it and came through it. And I probably shouldn't have, because of various drug ODs and wrong place, wrong time, murders that could have happened. I was almost killed probably half a dozen times, or death by misadventure, doing something stupid and just surviving it. So it's really kind of a crazy life and a cautionary tale. And then that doesn't even include Twisted Sister.
Right.
Right. We're not even there yet, So I've already lived 10 lifetimes. So, like I said to my mom when I was 20, well, the good news is I don't do drugs anymore. But the bad news may be that I've decided to become a transvestite rock musician, but straight, which was weird. Not that it was weird for me. I had already burned myself out on drugs. When I stopped. There was no point going back. I did enough for 10 people and saw crazy stuff and don't need to do that again. Never thought about it again. Seriously, never known. People say to me, how'd you avoid it? It's easy. Just it's not part of who you are.
What was the turning point that, like, what made you decide to quit cold turkey?
Well, two things. One is that my best friend and girlfriend were stone cold junkies, and as the heroin, I OD'd, and as the heroin thing became really big and wiped out the whole hippie love culture that started it all out. I hate to say that it leads to heroin. It did in our case. I told my mother in '67 when I started smoking pot, we're hippies, we're flower children. And 5 years later, the whole scene became heroin infested. and people were getting murdered or ODing and dying. And my best friend and my girlfriend were just part of that whole culture. And I woke up one morning and I said, you know, John, you've had 5 crazy years of of nonstop drug use and nonstop dealing, and you are still okay, and you're not, don't have a police record, and maybe it's time to get on the exit ramp, get on the
Yeah.
off ramp of that before it kills you. And so that was my preservational survival streak in me. I took the off ramp just before something really bad could have happened, and that's really what it was. I can't. There was nothing connected to it having to do with a religious experience. There was nothing about it having to do with going to a 12-step program. This was a practical guy getting up and going, man, you saw some crazy shit. You did some crazy shit. It's time to leave it. You can't get any crazier. You can't do any more drugs. You can't see any more insane hallucinations. You can't OD more. You know, the next step is just death. And so get out of it before you're arrested, and get out of it before you OD. And I did. I just picked a day, which was it was Easter Sunday, 1972. Whatever drugs I had left, I took them. And I said to myself, if I wake up tomorrow morning, that'll be the end of it. And I woke up the next morning and that was the end of it. And never looked back. And, but I was never a drinker. Alcohol was never part of that scene. And so when Twisted started 6 months later as a transvestite rock band, those guys were all drinkers. Yeah. And I never drank. I never liked the taste of alcohol. I've had 5 beers in my life. I just think it's terrible tasting. So I don't like beer. And then, of course, the band is playing in bars, so you get all the alcohol in the world in the bars. So the singer, who was a world-class alcoholic, tried to indoctrinate me into the world of alcohol. I mean, he didn't force anything down my throat. This wasn't like a frat party. He just said, you know, he said, wow, this is Scotch. You know, like we were in a bar and the bartender was good friends. And he said, set him up. And they bunch of shot glasses, and they put all different kinds of stuff, you know, Chivas and Jack Daniels and all that. And I tasted each one and I went, oh, this tastes like shit. Oh, this tastes like shit. Well, I went down like 20 glasses. I said, man, this is like the worst tasted garbage. How do you drink that? What? I guess you want to get drunk. That's why you drink it, because you can't be telling me that it tastes any good. So therefore, I never liked it. Now, that would have been fun and games had it not led to the fact that the drinking got in the way of the band's success heavily. And that version of the Twisted Sister fell apart within 2 years. And we climbed a mountain and then we fell apart. The book tells the story of this constant, like climbing up and falling apart, climbing up and falling apart. And I became, so it was enough. It wasn't just enough that I didn't like drugs anymore. And I wasn't going to proselytize about it, which is, you want to do them, knock yourself out. Just don't, I don't need my life complicated by your addictions and your problems. Well, you can always cut your friends out, but you got business partners who are fucked up. And so then you have to decide, you know, is that the way you want to run your business? And I didn't join the band to be a businessman. I joined the band as a guitar player. I didn't think about business. I just thought about playing guitar, even though I have the innate ability to function in a business situation. It wasn't part of the plan. But as I observed the playing field of a minefield of alcohol and drug disasters, I came to the conclusion that drugs and alcohol have no place in anything, including rock and roll, which of course is the antithesis of everything.
Yeah, of course.
That we live in rock and roll. I just came to a business decision. I said, yo, I don't care if it works for Motley Crue. I don't care if it works for the Rolling Stones, whatever it works for them. Doesn't work for me. I can't handle this. I won't subject myself to the stupidity of people who do. So putting together a straight band becomes a bit of a challenge, because why do guys want to join bands? Because it's girls, it's drugs, it's all that other shit. And, you know, you look at Gene and Paul from Kiss, you know, the two of them had the same theory, but then Peter and Ace didn't. Yeah. And eventually Peter and Ace suffered the results of probably the fact that they didn't. I mean, you know, more than likely that's what happened to them. And so, you know, one by one, we started replacing guys with guys who weren't into drugs and alcohol. And it just becomes difficult because, you know, what happens is you interview, let's say you're auditioning a drummer and he's a good drummer. And you say, by the way, you know, we really don't really like drinking and drugs. I mean, you want to have a beer on your off time, whatever. I'm not going to tell you this is a Jehovah's Witness organization, but but in the context of our working schedule, which is brutal, 5-6 days a week, rehearsing, playing, it's a brutal schedule. You can't keep up. So you get one or two responses. One response, which is the honest response, is, "Are you freaking kidding me? I thought that is part of the package. And no, I can't do that." And you go, "Thank you very much for being honest. Goodbye." Or, "Oh, of course, man, I don't do that." And of course they do. And they get fired
Yeah.
because they fuck up. So that's what happens. So the book goes into great detail about all the fits and starts and the lessons learned because of that, compounding all the other crap that comes into the business. There's so many different issues, so many problems and challenges and roadblocks that get thrown at you everywhere else. You have to deal with it internally as a company. It's even more problematic. And the rock and roll shtick that goes with it is more problematic. So you either have to be very strong, I mean, like to the point where you can just wear blinders and you're not allowing it in. And in my case, Dee's case, Mark Mendoza's case, we wear blinders, like doesn't exist. Well, when you don't allow partying to come in, you don't party with other bands either, because you have really nothing to do.
I was curious if that ever got in the way of like relationships with either, bands, you were featuring or opening for, or bands that were opening for you. I mean, did that lead to any tension or
no tension, just no interest.
Yeah.
No tension at all. Nobody cared. I mean, but they didn't invite you to parties, or you wouldn't go to them anyway, because why? Everyone's getting wasted. So we were pretty antisocial as a band. I can't say that was maybe a great career choice, because you're not hanging out with everybody getting wasted. But on the other hand, you're not hanging out with everybody getting wasted. So the whole scene was defined by partying, all those big tours and all the, "Hey, let's get together, man. It's on a tour bus, smoking," but if you're not into that, then that's boring. And you don't want to sit there and act like, and be like someone's parents. It's not like you're not invited, but then you go, well, if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and they're just stoned and it's like, "Hey, I love you, man," or one of those others, like the evocations of people who are high and all the bullshit that goes with it, or the cocaine fantasies that go with cocaine, it's like, man, and plus we were older. So by the time we had our hit records, we were already in our 30s. Everybody else was in their early 20s, So if those bands are in their early 20s, hell, I can't tell you at the age of 22, if we had a hit record, it could have been different. But by the time we got to be 32, I mean, for me, Stay Hungry happened in 84. So I was 32. The last thing I really wanted was anybody around me. I just was like, man, give me the paycheck and let me go home. I don't really have any interest whatsoever, do anything other than my job, which is go on stage, play, go to the studio, do it, make a video, do it, and go home. The rest of it is irrelevant to me. And so we had different managers during those periods of time, because managing in the hailstorm of that insanity becomes more of a problem. But the managers that we did bring in to work with me and eventually take over, they had their problems too. So if you look at the band's going to celebrate its 49th anniversary of its beginnings this December. Out of that 49 years, we were active for about 35 of those years, because we took a 12-year break. Out of the 35 years, I managed the band 30 of the 35 years. And when I managed the band, things tended to be smooth. And then we had these other guys, things tended to be, more turbulent.
Did that create like any power struggles inside the band with the other guys, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, Dee is a lead singer. Lead singers have their own cultural manifestations. He's a brilliant performer, brilliant writer, best front man I think I've ever seen, and doesn't get the credit for it. But I've stood shoulder to shoulder with him thousands of times, and I've seen everybody there is to see, and there's nobody that comes close to his vocal ability or to his entertainment factor.
Yeah,
not close. I mean, like Jagger is a great frontman, but he's not a great he's a great performer. He's not a great front man. Like he doesn't really talk doesn't really, he'll talk, he'll say a couple of phrases, and he's not really an entertainer. Great front man, not a great entertainer. People always say, well, he's very energetic. He runs around and he does his job and he sings great. And by the way, he's probably the only good thing about the Rolling Stones is his voice is still good and he runs around, but he's not a great front man. And Ozzy's certainly not a great front man. David Lee Roth was entertaining, but not a great singer. Dee's way better than him. Dio was a phenomenal singer.
Oh yeah.
Not particularly the most engaging front man, but my God, what a monster singer. Brian Johnson doesn't have to do very much. You've got like a catalog like that. You can just sit there and play the hits all night long. Brian happens to be one of the nicest people on the planet. And so is Ronnie Dio, by the way. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I've heard that about both of those guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, wonderful guys and great and fronting great bands and great catalog. They don't have to do much. They don't really have to do much. And Ozzy kind of squeaks by. He croaks through his life. He's fortunate that he can do it, but certainly not a particularly good front man. But Dee's the best, but with that is ego, and ego has created more problems. And like I discuss in the book, people say to me, well, you did this, meaning me, and but Dee's pictures out there, that was a creative choice that was made because it was packaging, like the way Angus is always in the front of an AC/DC cover. I mean, if you look at that, there's a band, but it's Angus's.
Yeah.
Or Fleetwood Mac's biggest cover was Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks. Where was the rest of the band? How did John McVie feel about the fact that it's called Fleetwood Mac for McVie?
Right.
And he's not on the cover of the record. How do you think he feels? Well, I don't know if his bank account's in much danger of feeling terrible. So, there's a quote from Ahmet Ertegun in the book, which is, success is easier if you don't mind who gets the credit, but you have to have a certain mindset. You have to be really circumspect. You have to have a really large playing field and a large view at a big picture, because otherwise you'll be stuck in your basement as a basement Mozart and be broke and, like saying I woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right.
Meanwhile, I got like 37 gold and platinum records on my wall. I'll live with it.
Yeah. I was wondering the business decision to kind of go straight as a band. It's funny, go straight as a band of transvestites, but is part of that like putting the fans first and making sure that the fans are getting 110% of all you have to offer?
100%. You live for that experience. The live experience is what fueled us for years, and our dedication to being great every night fueled us for years. And so 100% of that was an understanding that they're paying hard-earned money to see a great show, and you want to put on a great show. So having to apologize for sucking is not the greatest way to run a business.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was 100% dedication to a level of professionalism that most people will never attain because they don't want to sacrifice. They won't do the sacrifices they need. I talk about this in the book because I discuss the boredom of excellence. And the boredom of excellence is doing things over and over and over and over and over again and improving them every single time and improving them in small increments. That whole cliche about insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And I think that's bullshit. I said, when it comes to performers, athletes, doing something over and over and over again, expecting different results does happen, but sometimes it's just tiny. Maybe tonight we were great except for this one little thing, and we're going to make sure tomorrow we don't do that. We're going to maybe screw up somewhere else, but not there. So they come in tiny amounts, but the best people in the world do this over and over again. And that's the boredom of excellence, because, you're not going to wake up at 4:00 in the morning and ski for 8 hours, but the gold medal skier will do that, but you won't do that, and the first chair at the Philharmonic violin player is playing 8 hours a day. You're not going to do that, but that person's going to do that. And that's how I look at it. If you're willing to do that, that will set you apart from all the people who don't. And 99.99% of the people don't do that because they want to do something else. That's a very tedious, driven mental state. D is an extremely driven individual. I'm a driven individual. Mark Mendoza is a driven individual. Eddie Ojeda, then of course you had to create an atmosphere that you could be stable enough to withstand this kind of repetition, which means that you needed to create an economic base that everybody could function in. That's the stability. So the twisted method of reinvention, which I talk about in the book, which is taking the words twisted, TWISTED, and using each letter as a talking point. There's a reason why each letter matters. Stability in any business is important. If you look at a business like a jet flying through the air, and most of the time it's smooth, and then they go, please put on your seatbelt. We're gonna have a little turbulence, that may be a challenge. And then there's more turbulence, and that may be a crisis. You don't want catastrophe to happen. So how good are you at neutralizing those challenges and the crises before it hits catastrophes? Most people do not perceive a band approaching that in a business way. They just see the music. Hey man, let's party, let's rock and roll. Oh yeah, right. Well, one guy OD'd and one guy died, and we replaced him, and then the album bombed, and we went broke, and we came back together again. Then a couple went to rehab, and it's these broad stories. And okay, and that's true. But the nuance of all those stories is what I'm telling you. The weeds, getting into the weeds of all of it, is what I did in the book, and most people never did that before. So what the book basically says is, here's a company, Twisted Sister. Here's a problem. Here's how JJ looked at the problem. Here's what his solution to the problem was. And here was the end result of that solution. And it takes you through real world issues, not hypotheticals like you learn in school, like real world shit, because I'm a high school dropout. So everything I learned on the street. And there were very tough lessons, like really, really, really tough lessons. And many don't survive it. But I could tell you that if I was high, or if I had alcohol and drug problems, that only adds to the problem of solving a problem, because now you've got the problem, and then you got the problem on top of the problem. I just take away the problem on top of the problem, which is drugs and alcohol. Now I'm just dealing with the problem. Sounds easy, but it's not.
Yeah, I don't think most people think, or fans anyway, think of bands as brands or as small businesses. And my background, I'm a marketing guy, ran my own marketing business, and now I teach marketing at a university here in Connecticut. But I'm just wondering, like, did you think about the band as a brand, and did you, it sounds like you thought about it as a small business and managed it as a business versus a Party Central or something like that?
Eventually, yeah. Keith Richards tells this joke or story. It's the difference between Mick and Keith. And he says, well, Mick wakes up every morning and says, what am I doing today, 10 days from now? What am I doing 10 weeks from now? What am I doing in 10 months from now? What am I doing in 10 years from now? And Keith gets up every morning and says, I woke up this morning. So I definitely became aware of my ability to see things 10 months, 10 years down the line. And that also came with a diary that I started keeping at a very, very important part of my life, which I described in the book. I was 22 years old. And when the band first broke up, the original version of the band in 74, the singer had pulled a gun out on the drummer in a bar fight and didn't kill him, thankfully, didn't pull the trigger. It just led to a fist fight, which led to the breakup of the band. That, coupled with my girlfriend, who I was desperately in love with, leaving me, and my mother dying all in the same couple of weeks, led me to a crushing depression, which led me to I was considered suicide. I didn't kill myself, obviously. And there's all lessons about that, which I talk about in the book. I take depression very, very, very seriously. And I tell people, if you get that depressed where you can't see the forest or the trees, and waking up every day is a nightmare, you have to seek professional help, and you have to maybe get medication or whatever the doctor tells you to do, but you can't run away from it. I did not do that. I was lucky in that I endured 8 months of unbelievably unrelenting physical pain, and then woke up one morning and the pain was gone. And I thought, wow, that's a mistake. It's going to come back tomorrow. And it didn't come back. But the point is, I started keeping a diary of my mental state at the very beginning of this whole journey, on the night of my mother's funeral service. And that diary lasted 15 years. And the beauty of that diary is that I kept logs of my mental state and the band's shows and blah, 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 blah. And what you learn from that as time goes on is you go back to what you wrote when things were through a tough patch and you got through it and you go, oh, I got through that. At the time, I couldn't see how I was going to get through that. At the time, it was beyond bleak, and I did. And there've been enough of those episodes of my life where I've gotten through things that I thought I could never get through, that I'm pretty confident that I'll figure out ways how to get through them at this point. But it's almost impossible to see it when it's happening. And, you know, then of course you can laugh about it years later if you survive it. But at the time, it's horrible. So putting those kinds of things in perspective at the time they're happening is a tough thing to do. That's what a good manager can do. And then projecting where you think things are going is another issue, you know, and so I've shown enough of an ability to kind of see that too, you know. But again, that's a trait that is an innate trait in me, and it's an element of why the band made it. You know, the band also is a combination of great talent. So you've got Dee, who writes the songs, you have Eddie, who plays this amazing guitar, and Mark Mendoza, great producer, great bass player, AJ Pirro, who passed away, great drummer. So all of that comes into play. It's a collaborative affair. Companies are collaborative affairs, and how a company is structured will depend on the ability for your partners or the people who work for you to want to dedicate themselves to this vision that exists. So Dee was an incredibly creative guy, especially in the early stages, you know, up to the record deals, he was the visionary for that. But then you had to implement that with practicality, you know, like who puts together the time frames to be able to make these things happen and all the stuff that goes with it. You know, it's a company. I mean, look, it's rock and roll, so it's sexy. It's rock and roll, so the stories are, people want to read about it. You know the band, that makes you compelled to want to know the story. But at the end of the day, it's a business story that is applicable to, you know, to anything, to any business at all, to a shoe company, you know, to a car company, to any company. They're just, that's how companies survive.
Yeah.
And that's really why I love the book so much, especially my co-author, Steve Farber, who's written bestsellers and brought me into the world of corporate speaking engagements, because all of a sudden I'm not being hired by music groups, which I thought in the beginning would. No, I'm being hired by financial institutions, travel agencies, accounting companies, insurance companies. I mean, because I'm telling an entertaining story about the music business, but what I'm telling them is absolutely applicable to their businesses.
Yeah. I mean, I was introduced to the band like many people in my generation in 84 with Stay Hungry, you know. What role did MTV play in sort of the meteoric rise? And maybe meteoric is the wrong term.
No, it's the right word.
Okay.
It was both the meteoric rise and the fall.
Yeah.
I mean, MTV was the video version of the AM radio hit parade back in the 50s and 60s. You know, back in those days, there was only one number one. Everybody in the world knew it because there was only one outlet, and that was pop radio. And then MTV became the visual version of pop radio. So if you were super big on MTV, everybody knew you. Today, being number one on a chart is like trying to tell me who's the number one boxer in the world. There's 10 belts.
Right.
You can't keep track of the belts, right? You can't keep track of number ones either, because you're number one country, you're number one hip hop, you're number one urban, you're number one pop, you're number one dance, you're number one EDM. What are you number one at? You know, there's no universal number one anymore. Everything is so splintered. But, you know, having said that, MTV was a huge, we used MTV and MTV used us. And unfortunately, you know, the problem with MTV is that MTV ushered in the age of goofy rock, I call it, you know, like the super technicolor dopey rock acts, you know, like, and the videos that go with it, that are all funny. But whether it's Walk Like an Egyptian, or whether it's Devo with the flower pots on their head, or other such gimmicky stuff. I mean, it's gimmicky, it's flavor of the month, it's hot, but at the end of the day, it's frivolous and foamy and worthless, and there's just a whole bunch of goofy rock out there. You know, Van Halen was David Lee Roth could have taken him into the goofy rock world, but Eddie was so good at anchoring them that it and then eventually David left and they became more of a serious, band.
Yeah.
Angus from AC/DC could be goofy rock, but their songs are so great they saved themselves from the goofy rock moniker. But we got slammed with it, because we ran with it, and then we made some mistakes, which I go into in the book about.
Yeah.
But we had redemption at the end.
Yeah.
We came back after 12 years of being in the forest, roaming around, doing nothing, thinking there was no future. And then we came back. And then when we came back, it didn't matter about MTV, and it didn't matter about the charts. The band's reputation that was forged in the fires of the bar scene, which taught us how to be a great band, was so strong that all of a sudden we come back and we're headlining the biggest festivals in the world. And so for 14 years, we headlined 125 of the world's biggest shows. Now, how important is that? I'll put that in perspective. When you're playing to 100,000 people and you're closing a festival, you can't suck. And there's only a handful of artists that are trusted with 100,000 people on this planet. This is a handful. You have to really know what you're doing to play 100,000 people, because not only do you have to be great, make sure you put on a good show, but the festival relies on the fact that people walk out and go, man, that was a great festival. I was worth my 200 euros, 300 euros. Well, there's only like 10 or 15 artists that can be trusted with 100,000 people. And we are one of those artists, and we are trusted with that amount of people because we know how to do it. And it's an art form.
So in terms of sort of the fall after the MTV, peak, how did you guys, and there was a breakthrough, but how did you guys reinvent yourselves? Like how, was that a strategic process, or what was that all about?
It wasn't a strategic process. It was done. I became a stereo salesman out of the business completely. D wrote a song, it became a hit for Celine Dion, which was great for him, but he lost everything. D and I filed for bankruptcy and lost everything. And Mark went off and did his thing, and Eddie went off and did his thing. I detail in the book, D and I first had to repair our relationship because we had a horrible relationship. So we stopped playing in 88, and in 96, D and I had a meeting in my apartment, and for the sole purpose of just, we were done. So there was no bringing the band back together. It just so happened that I did an audit and found that one of our albums had just gone triple platinum, and had to mail everybody a triple platinum plaque. And the one I sent to D came back to me, and I didn't understand why. And through a series of conversations, we wound up on the phone together. And I said to him, we hadn't spoken since 88. And I said, why don't you come in and we'll talk? So he comes to my house and sits in my kitchen for 3 or 4 hours. And we just let it out, everything we ever thought about each other, both sides. And at the end of it, D apologized for things he said. I apologized for things he interpreted that I did. And then we walked away. And I went, you know what? Cool, because I will wake up tomorrow not hating you for the first time in, 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was all. That was it. There was no intention. There was no other intent. I never thought the band would get back together. The band got back together because of 9/11, because we are all New Yorkers, all born in New York City, all 5 of us. And we all lost people in 9/11, as did many New Yorkers. The 6 degrees of separation. I mean, my daughter's 3rd grade teacher's husband died in it. Eddie Ojeda had a sister-in-law and a nephew in the buildings. They both got out. I mean, the stories are just horrible. And we reunited to do a benefit to raise money for the Widows and Orphans Fund from New York City Police Fire Department and emergency services workers. And that was it. It was just a benefit. We had fun rehearsing. It was fun. We did the show. And then all of a sudden the word got out that Twisted put on this amazing show, the Hammerstein Ballroom. And then we started getting offers. And then, then I looked at the guys and they looked at me like, well, we can't go on the road. We don't have a band. There's no infrastructure anymore. Unless you have a bunch of shows, it costs so much to ramp up a business. So it wasn't practical. So we had to wait a couple of years to figure out ways to make it practical. Then we thought we'd last 2 years, 3 years, and it went on for 14. As it was rolling on, options started coming up, like the Twisted Christmas record. Now that record, I knew that record would sell well if we made the right record. Why? Because people don't give downloads for Christmas; they give tangible products. So we told the record label, you make CDs and vinyl, people will buy it. That's what they want to give for Christmas, and that was correct. That was a correct analysis, and the record was huge in U.S. and Europe. And we got on multiple television shows. All of a sudden, Twisted Sister's back everywhere. And then the shows in Europe kept climbing, and it kept going and going. And I kept thinking, when's it going to end? When's it going to end? And it got bigger and bigger and bigger, because 80s metal and that whole thing is gigantic and is today. You could put us, Judas Priest, Whitesnake, Motley on a tour in Europe, and you sell at soccer stadiums or South America, because the kids, and they're 15 years old or 20 years old, love this stuff. Anyway, we became aware of that, but then the licensing of the music became huge, and that was another thing too. How much We're Not Going to Take It, I Want to Rock became the two of the biggest licensed songs, and that allowed us to. That gave us some options of not having to play, because the generating of the money from the licensing was good. So, but then again, holding on to the trademark. I tell the story about the trademark almost being taken away from me by a judge during my bankruptcy trial, and what I said to the judge is an important piece of this history, because when I talk about wisdom, which is the W part of the book, that's where the vision, the long-term approach really kind of steps in. And there's a lot of those along the way too. And I always, people always talk about this, well, man, it's an amazing character you developed. And I said, no. I said, chaos does not develop character, it exposes character. You have to have it in you. And it will come out when you least expect it. Kind of like, you hear these stories like a car ran over a baby and a mother lifted up a 2,000-pound car full of baby. Well, because she wanted to save her kid, and so she was able to do extraordinary things. You do extraordinary things under extraordinary circumstances, and understanding chaos in a business is important, and understanding proactive and reactive chaos. It gets into the weeds, because people don't think that a musician thinks this way, or that you approach this thing with this kind of practical knowledge. But everyone's confronted with chaos in their life, and challenges and crises. And there's proactive and reactive. Reactive is how you react to it when you least expect it. Proactive gives you a shot at it to prepare yourself for the oncoming storm. And trying to be proactive in your chaos is way better than reactive, because how, like in football, the offense knows what the defense is. The offense knows a split second more than the defense does. And that's what happens in business too. Businesses shake themselves up a lot, and they have to in order to survive. And that's proactive chaos. Like, they know what they're doing and they're taking a risk. But you don't want to be the subject of reactive chaos, where all of a sudden prices go out of control. You didn't see that coming, or there's a truck accident that kills the driver, and you didn't see that coming. And listen, so much of this crap happened at Twisted Sister. I mean, we had our trucks blown up and sabotaged. My drummer my singer pulls a gun on a drummer, threatens to kill him. I get threatened by a recording studio guy who threatens to break my legs. And, we had to bring in people to, make a copacetic arrangement and take care of that. This is all, I could never have, when I was 20, this was not what I signed up for. I thought it was just going to be like, rock and roll. I didn't realize I was going to be thrown into the midst of this freaking, and then the music business is a cesspool of crap anyway. And the egos you deal with, forget the band egos. What are the egos of the record company presidents who wish they were you, but they're not, but they control you, so they make you feel like crap, and they're fucking nuts. They're nuts. I mean, so you deal with that psychotic shit, which is all the people around you who claim that they made you, and they claim that you owe them. And, it's I don't wish this business on anybody, but I think it's arrogant to say that, because someone could have said that to me when I was 20. So you don't want to get in this business. It's too bad. It's really tough.
Yeah. And then
when there's a lot of money, it's a tough business.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a couple crazy club owners out there that you could tell stories about.
Man, there certainly are, yes. And I go into detail in the book about some of them, but we had a club owner who, from what we understand, we never could prove it. But when our truck was blown up, was set on fire, I understand that this one rival club owner, because we refused to play in his room, told one of his sons to blow up our truck, and did it at a venue with 2,000 people in the room. And our truck was set on fire. And that was a fun night, you know. That was a really fun experience. Or one of my drummers, somehow doing something to some girl that she didn't like, and she brought a whole bunch of guys back to the bar at 5 o'clock in the morning to attack the road crew and beat them with baseball bats and put my drummer in the hospital. We weren't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to be threatened by this guy. I wasn't expecting all, this stuff and that stuff to happen. I wasn't expecting to go through multiple band member changes because of drug and alcohol abuse, which happened on a fairly regular basis. So it's how you respond to all this stuff that really makes the story compelling. Then people would say, well, what about the music? Oh, you mean there's music involved? Oh, I forgot. There's albums and songs. Yeah, we managed to fit that in between all the ridiculousness.
Right. I'm curious, so the way the music industry has changed, in the 49 years that you've been kind of actively part of it. Is it a business you would choose to get into now?
When I was 20 and didn't know better, the playing field is very different from what the playing field is today, but it's still a playing field. So if you apply the rules of the playing field philosophy, which I will tell you what that is, then it should be okay, because it's an even playing field. In other words, somebody makes money, someone's successful, so why can't it be you? That's the question you have to ask yourself. No, it's a very different business. So when a musician comes up to me, he's 20 years old, and says, give him some advice, the first thing I want to say is, you're asking the guy who's almost 70 for advice. I didn't ask anybody for advice. I said, you're 20, you should be figuring this out. You shouldn't be asking me. But in my world, when I was 20, Nixon was president. Gasoline was 23 cents a gallon. You could rent a house for $300 a month. You could rent a truck for $25 a week. Drinking age was 18. The clubs were gigantic. You can make $150 a night, $900 a week as a band. Because gas was 23 cents a gallon and a house was $300 a month, and the phone bills were $20 a month, and electric bills were $20 a month, you could live together. You could learn how to play in a band. You could put money away. All you have to do is start making $300, $400, $500 a night, 5 nights, 6 nights a week. That's $2,000 a week. That's $8,000 a month. All of a sudden, you got plenty of money. You have stability in the band. You can pay for your demos at the studios and all that other stuff. So that's the cocoon that I lived under. So in those days, what did we do? We had a certain value out of the box because we could work right away. Nowadays, bands walk up to me and they go, man, you got to come and see my band. And I go, well, how many shows you played? How long you been together? And they go, 2 years. And I go, how many shows you played? They say 50. Like, that's a big deal. Like, that's a big thing. 50 shows, right? Wow, 2 years. And I'd say, okay, well, when you get to 500, let me know. And they go, well, we'll never get to 500. And I said, well, there's a good chance I will never come to see your band, because you're going to suck until your 500th show. I'm not going to waste my time. And they go, well, how many did you do? Well, let me tell you how this works numerically. We worked 5 shows from the very beginning, 5 shows a night, 6 nights a week. So that's 30 shows in a week, right? That's 120 a month. That's what, 12, that's 1,400 a year. So in the first 3 years, we're at what? We're at 28, 38, we're at 4,000 shows in 3 years. 4,000 performances. Okay. That's how you get good. So that doesn't exist today. That simply doesn't exist today. So, but what we did was, first thing we did as a band was we said, well, we're making 150 a night, but that band's making 300 a night. Why are they making 300 a night? Let's go see them. Okay. Their song choices were different. Their lighting was better. Blah, 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 blah. So we started copying a little bit, like that's what you do. You kind of like, like I say to people, before you're the Beatles, you better be better than the band next door. That's number one. You got to kill your competition off here locally before, you want to be Apple. That's great. But, be grape first before you're Apple. I mean, you just have to start. So when I went to young bands, I'll just go, are there bands that that are more successful than you that you go see regularly, local? Yeah. I said, well, what are they doing? What do you mean? Well, what are they doing? Is their social media better? What are they doing that you're not doing? Copy what they do. I mean, that's what we all do. In the beginning, you kind of copy something, You try to be better. Look, why are you an entrepreneur? There's two reasons why you're an entrepreneur. One is that you've come up with something that the world has never seen before, and you're willing to sacrifice everything you've ever owned to bring it to the world. Or you see something that exists before, but you think you can do it better. That's the two things. That's it. That sums up entrepreneurship right there. You're either improving the existing model or you're coming up with something new. Well, Twisted Sister there's millions of bands before Twisted Sister. We wanted to improve an existing model. The Dolls were an existing model. We thought they sucked. They were awful. If they didn't look the way they did, they can't play their way out of a paper bag. Not to be confused with the Sex Pistols or the Ramones, who were actually really good bands with a focus. The Dolls were just a bad band. I don't care, you Dolls fans can go screaming all you want. They sucked. And they were, we go see them all the time because they played at the Mercer Arts Center. I knew the guys before they put on women's clothing. They sucked then and they sucked afterwards. They were never any good. David Johansen said the band sucked. Well, I'm not going to argue with the lead singer of the band. That's his opinion. I saw them later on when they actually had musicians in the band, like Steve Conti. They were great, but not with that lineup. I'm sorry. They were too fucking wasted. And it just wasn't good. And not only was it not good, I didn't understand how you could be that bad. Because frankly, I had come after 4 years of greatness at the Fillmore. 4 years of greatness, 4 years of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Grateful Dead, Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck, The Who, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We had 4 years of greatness. Then it closes, and the Dolls is what we have. After 4 years of evolution, we have the de-evolution of this shit. You got to be kidding me. So why did I even bother practicing? I could just suck and play like that, anyway. So we went to, we're all like, oh, the Dolls look amazing. They did. They look great. I thought they looked fabulous. They just couldn't. And my quote, I even told that to a record company executive at the Mercer Arts Center. I was walking out after one show and a guy in a suit said, so can I ask you your opinion? And it had to be a record company executive. He was wearing a suit, he looked like he was in his mid 30s. And I said, man, they're an amazing looking band. And if they ever learn how to play, they may be of some value. That was my quote. Yeah. So I'm not going to go back on it. That's what it was. It was garbage, pure and simple, but Twisted could be a better version of that. Now, we weren't really, because we were a copy band. But we were full of great musicians in the early stages. That first band, the drummer was a great drummer. The guitar player was great. The singer was really good. The bass player was maybe the best musician we ever had in Twisted Sister. And so you could take apart Mott Records and Rolling Stones and play them really well. And we were a copy band. Okay, so we weren't playing originals. So I'd rather play copy than crummy originals. I really have no reason to listen to people who can't sing and can't play original shit. Not interested. So we did excel to a point because we became very popular. Now, we were the house band at the Mad Hatter in the Hamptons, which was this huge gig. That was the entire summer of 73. And 2 of the 3 months in 74, we reigned supreme. And a club owner in the Hamptons decided to bring the New York Dolls out because we had established a beachhead in the Hamptons. So he's going to bring out the band, the Dolls. And, and I went to see the Dolls when they came out. And it was horrible because nobody cared. Those kids wanted to hear Smoke on the Water and, Bowie and Lou Reed and Mott. And they didn't really want to hear Personality Crisis, in a band that could barely play because everybody else were players. So that's the difference. And so that's what we tried to do. We tried to improve on an existing model. And then look what happened. Over time, the Dolls fall apart. They go by the wayside. Twisted just evolves and evolves and evolves and evolves and evolves until we finally play catch up and hit the big time, 12 years later. And by the way, Kiss, to their credit, Kiss came out at the exact same time. I have a magazine in 73 with the Dolls on the cover and Kiss and Twisted Sister in 2 black and white shots. Mm-hmm. It all came out at the same time. And Kiss knew exactly what they wanted to do. They had a vision. They had a real vision. You could like them, you can hate them. They had a vision. They pulled it off. They're very successful. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that. Mega successful. mega records that were successful. Jim and Paul knew exactly what they were shooting for. They were very business oriented. They stayed true pretty much, ventured off a little bit in the disco world. Everybody kind of got thrown off around that period. But, look. So look at the bands that came out of 73. AC/DC, Judas Priest, Twisted Sister. There's another one. Us. Well, Alice was earlier. Van Halen. Yeah. So look at these. These are all 73. No, Van Halen came back later. But if you look at Us and Priest and Kiss and AC/DC, yeah. Look. And here we are, 50 years later. If you had asked any of us in 73, how long are you going to last? The answer would have been 5 years. That was the standard answer. Oh, 5 years, maybe 10, because the Beatles lasted 10. But other than that, that was it. So I think it's absolutely insane that we're all here 50 years later, but it's a testament to all of our business acumen, Priest, AC/DC, Kiss and us, when no one expected for this to last like this.
As we wrap up here, I'm just curious. The last show was in 2016 for Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
What was that like? Just sort of playing that last number, taking your final bow. Like what's kind of going on in your mind at that time?
I was happy to be done with it. My wife, I got very emotional in the dressing room talking to the road crew that night. I miss those guys. But in terms of performance, for me, it goes back to 73. Dee came in much later. Eddie came in later. Mark came in later. For me, all those thousands of shows eventually take their toll. So I didn't understand for many years when they would interview a retired football player or baseball player. And they'd say, "So, how's your team doing?" They go, "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? Don't you watch them?" "No." "You don't go to games?" "No." I never understood that. I'm saying, what do you mean you don't know? How do you not? This is your life. Now I know. Some people just go, been there, done that, done with it. So when Twisted first ended in 88, I would dream about the band getting back together again. There was unfinished business, but there's no unfinished business anymore. We came back incredibly, had another hit record with a Christmas record, come back headlining all these shows around the world, crowning achievement. Beautiful. Played South America, played Buenos Aires, the greatest rock and roll city, singularly the greatest rock and roll city in the world. As for 65-year-old guys to have people screaming at you like it's Beatlemania is not to be believed. And the crowds in South America in general, it's more of a religious experience. They're so passionate. Not to say that we don't have great fans in Germany and Sweden and Norway. We do, but my God, South America, Mexico, it's a whole other world down there. And we got to live it. We got to live it. And then, we did crazy stuff. Like we played the Arctic Circle on a Friday, and we played Oklahoma on a Sunday, and that was 9 flights and 12 time zones and 3,000 miles. And the sun doesn't set in the Arctic Circle, so you're playing to 10,000 of the drunkest people on the planet Earth. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the sun's up in the air, and then you stay awake and you fly 24 hours to Oklahoma City, and you play a show in Oklahoma City, and you fly home, and you realize that in one 85-hour period of time, you've been on 9 flights, 1 4-hour bus ride to get to the tip of the Arctic Circle. You've played in 12 different time zones. And all the baggage and luggage all arrived on time, and no flights were missed. Those are one of these great, crazy, 3-day things. And my wife asked me how I felt when I got home. And I said, considering the jet lag, the time disruptions. And my quote to her was, "I used to pay money in high school to get in this condition, but I have no desire to be in this condition anymore."
You also used to make money getting other people in that condition as well.
Yeah, and I was making money getting in that condition this time, but I just, no, I just, at my age, our motto is sex, prescription, drugs, and rock and roll. We have a whole different, view of it.
That's funny. Well, the book is Twisted Business: Lessons from My Life in Rock and Roll. The author is JJ French. This is a fun conversation. I want to make this book right here mandatory reading for my students at Sacred Heart University, because it is a business book. There's a lot of great business lessons in there, from strategic planning and business management to reinvention and competitive intelligence I'd throw in there as well. So, JJ, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on the show.